the government has made substantial cuts to business rates, to VAT, and has produced a package of £260 billion of support for businesses and jobs and livelihoods across the UK. And I repeat the points that I've made about the self-employed. I have massive sympathy with everybody who's facing a tough time at the moment. And I agree with him very much in what he said about the resilience of businesses. I think they are showing fantastic resilience under a huge amount of pressure. But the best way to help them now is for us, as I say, to follow this latest lockdown and get that vaccine rolled out and get our economy moving again in the way that we all want to. And the faster we can get through this period, the bigger the bounce back will be. And I'm confident that it will be a very, very substantial bounce back indeed.
Let's head up to Stoke-on-Trent Central with Joe Gideon. Joe Gideon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Stoke-on-Trent is keen to play our part in the national vaccination programme. Our mass vaccination centre is ready and able to serve the residents of Stoke-on-Trent in North Staffordshire. However, it has not been scheduled to go live before the end of January. Can the Prime Minister ask the Health Secretary if this can be expedited if the supply of vaccines are available earlier?
Prime Minister.
Yes, indeed, Mr. Speaker, and I'll ask the Minister to write to her as soon as possible.
Let's head to Marianne with Liz Saville-Roberts. Liz Saville-Roberts.
Diolch yn fawr iawn, Llefarydd, and I also would like to send best wishes to the Member of Parliament for Cardiff Central and sincere thanks to everybody working on the front line with the NHS at this time. Now, a Conservative Party newsletter recently told party members to say, the first thing that comes into your head, even if it's nonsense. Yesterday, it appears the Chancellor took on board this advice and unwrapped £227 million of already announced funding as new for Wales. This is, and I choose my words with extreme restraint, willful misrepresentation, which deliberately misinforms desperate businesses in Wales. Will the Prime Minister apologise on behalf of his Chancellor and recognise that for Welsh COVID measures to be most effective, there's an urgent need to lift financial borrowing constraints imposed on Wales by Westminster?
Well, I'm sure the Honourable Lady, whom I have a keen regard, would not wish to accuse the Chancellor of willful misrepresentation, Mr. Speaker. But all the cash that we've announced obviously is passported on. The important thing is that the Labour government in Wales spends it sensibly, but the UK government is here to support businesses, jobs, livelihoods across the whole of the UK.
Can I just say while you're online, I'm not over happy with willful. I think we've got to think about the language we use within the chamber. These are times which are unprecedented, but I really do think members ought to be careful on the language they use. Secretary Batty Meriden.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Prime Minister for his statement. I know he's had to take difficult decisions, and I understand why he's had to, and I fully support him. I am deeply concerned, however, about the impact of COVID-19 and lockdowns on our children and on our future generations, and especially those children who come from disadvantaged backgrounds. Does my right honourable friend share those concerns, and will he work with schools, especially the ones in my constituency, to make sure they get the IT support and laptops that they need so that we leave no child behind?
Prime Minister.
My honourable friend is absolutely right to raise that question, and that's why we're putting so much cash, 300 million, into help schools and young people continue with their education online. We've discussed already the role of the BBC and the mobile phone companies, internet providers in helping as well, and the 560,000 devices that we've already delivered as part of a programme of 1 million for the children that need them most, laptops, computers and other devices.
Let's head to Brighton Pavilion with Caroline Lucas. Caroline Lucas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's extraordinary that yet again the Prime Minister didn't say a word about the government's test, trace, isolate and support system. Vaccination and lockdown are essential tools, but they don't replace the need to trace infections and isolate cases to help break the chain of transmission. It is an enduring scandal that we still don't have an effective contact tracing system, despite a whopping £22 billion being thrown at private companies and consultants. So will the Prime Minister fix it, including by ensuring people can afford to self-isolate if they have to, Will he increase statutory sick pay, widen eligibility criteria so the nearly 2 million people locked out of it can finally benefit? Will he increase the value of support payments and offer hotel accommodation if people need it?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we've increased the support for those who are self-isolating and obviously increased the penalties for those who fail to do so when they're asked to do so by test and trace. It's an absolutely vital part of our fight against the disease. And what it has done, I think, which people don't appreciate, is it's actually allowed this country to have an incredibly detailed understanding of where the disease is and what kind of disease we're fighting. The UK is actually conducting 47% of all the genomic tests in the world to establish what is going on with the coronavirus and all its mutations. So NHS Test and Trace is a remarkable advance. Is it perfect? Of course it isn't, but it is also indispensable to our fight against the disease, as is, of course, people's self-isolation when they are contacted. You must self-isolate.
William Wright.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I pay tribute to everybody at Stepping Hill Hospital and GPs across Stockport for their superb efforts in rolling out the vaccine, where all care home residents and those over the age of 80 will have received at least their first jab by the 15th of January. But will the Prime Minister ensure that he blasts away any bureaucratic barriers that are getting in the way and ensure that vital vials and other such equipment is in abundant supply? Because frankly, Mr. Speaker, there will be no excuses for any hindrance to this supreme national effort.
Prime Minister.
My honourable friend speaks entirely for me in what he says about the need to blast away bureaucratic obstructions, and I am proud to say at the moment that we've vaccinated more than any other country in Europe, indeed more than any country in Europe put together. But that pace must not only be kept up, it must now, as the whole House can see, because everybody can do the maths, Mr. Speaker, it must now be accelerated. And we'll be saying more, Mr. Speaker, about how we propose to do that.
Samuel Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Prime Minister, for the third time in 9 months, the government has introduced a damaging lockdown policy, which we know will cause thousands of businesses to go bankrupt, cost hundreds of thousands of jobs, damage children's education, lead the national debt to soar, remove basic liberties from people which we expect in a free democracy, all because the government says that we need, and the justification is we need to suppress the virus, protect the National Health Service, and to protect the vulnerable. Since those objectives were not achieved by the first two lockdowns, why does the Prime Minister believe that it will be achieved this time? Is there some firm evidence for it, or is it government just hoping it'll be third time lucky?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I don't think anybody in this House takes any pleasure or satisfaction, whatever, in what we're being forced to do. But the Honourable Gentleman should know that lockdowns like this are being conducted and have been conducted across the whole of Europe at the moment, because or much of Western Europe, basically because we're all facing the same phenomenon, and basically because we have to protect our NHS and stop it from being overwhelmed. And actually, that is what the last lockdowns did. They did stop the NHS from being overtopped by the wave of the pandemic. And had that happened, I'm afraid the death toll would have been unconscionable, and that is why I think when he looks at what his constituents and what the public think about this, they know that overwhelmingly we are right to protect them, protect the NHS, and save lives.
Tom Hunt.
Mr. Speaker, I actually asked the people of Ipswich to come up with ideas for this question. The one I decided to go for was about the importance of grassroots sports clubs in Ipswich, particularly boxing clubs. In the summer, I visited Patrick's Boxing Club, which got help in the first lockdown, but at the moment it is struggling. It's still got fixed costs. It's got its rent, it's got its utility bills, but it's still adding a burden. And also Unity FC Club and the Ipswich Kickboxing Academy as well, which has a fantastic jab, not stab scheme to help combat crime and antisocial behaviour. Will the Prime Minister promise me that when he considers any further support for these crucial clubs that are based in the most deprived parts of the town that I have the honour of representing, that he takes into account not just the benefits for physical and mental health, but also the key role that they play, keep kids on the straight and narrow, keep them out of harm, keep them out of trouble, and make a fantastic contribution to our wonderful town?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, Ipswich will of course be benefiting not just from kickboxing jabs, but from vaccination jabs as well, and that will enable us to get through this crisis all the faster. And I'm delighted by what he says, but we are supporting clubs such as the one he so eloquently describes by an extra £210 million to help wonderful community sports institutions such as Ipswich Kickboxing Academy throughout this pandemic.
We now go over to Jeremy Corbyn. Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Prime Minister appreciate that the campaign against COVID does not fall equally on everyone in our society? For many, this third lockdown is one of devastating fear of mental health, isolation, job loss, poverty, loss of their place of residence, and stress about the future. So will he, at the very least, ensure that statutory sick pay is increased to £320 a week, the universal credit is not cut, that the continuation of the protection of private tenants goes on after the end of this lockdown, and that above all else, he ensures that every child in every school and every student has a chance to learn online by provision of a computer and, yes, free universal broadband for all in our society?
Minister?
I thank the right honourable gentleman, who seems to be really recapitulating what his right honourable colleague has already asked me, as though he was still doing his old job. But I don't necessarily want to repeat all the points that I've made. Obviously, we're investing heavily to support jobs and livelihoods throughout the country. On mental health, he's right to draw attention to the risk of increased suffering caused by the privations of lockdown. That's why we're investing hugely in mental health provision, another 13 billion plus 18 million support for wonderful mental health charities across the country.
So Desmond Swain.
Pubs can't compete with supermarkets for off sales. Even within a household, you can't play tennis or golf. Notwithstanding the assault on liberty and livelihoods, why are these regulations pervaded by a pettifogging malice?
Prime Minister?
Pettifogging, yes. Malicious, no, Mr. Speaker. The intention, and I'm going to have to take the hit here, the intention is to stop the virus, to protect the NHS and to save lives. And to do that, we have to engage in restricting transmission between human beings. And I know that my right honourable friends and colleagues, honourable right honourable members, will find all sorts of reasons to oppose all sorts of restrictions. But in the end, Mr. Speaker, we have to look at the overall budget of risk caused by transmission between members of the human race. And that is what we're trying to restrict.
Let's head up to Greater Manchester with Lucy Powell. Lucy Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've just come from a call with the big business organisations, and I know the Prime Minister is meeting with them later on. So let me give him the heads up. Businesses are on their knees. It's been a year of lost trade and mounting debts. Cash grants are welcome, but they're not enough, and most won't get them anyway. What they desperately want is not more sticking plasters, but a proper long-term plan to help them survive to the spring and then thrive beyond it. It can't wait until the budget, because many will be bust by then. So can he urgently tell his Chancellor to come to this House with a proper plan for jobs and businesses? And please don't insult us by re-rehearsing what he's already done, because honestly, it's just not enough.
Prime Minister?
Well, Mr. Speaker, she asked for a timetable, as indeed many colleagues on both sides of the House have done so, and business rightly wants as much certainty as possible. I think what we have now, for the first time since this pandemic began, is clear sight of the end and the way to the end, and we've set a deadline, as she knows, of the middle of February, 15th of February, to vaccinate the first 4 cohorts, and I'm sure she will appreciate that those groups comprise the overwhelming majority of those who have already, alas, died from COVID. So she will readily appreciate the implications of that for our ability to reopen our economy, and she will also understand, I hope, the implications that could have, if all the conditions that I've already described are satisfied, the implications that could have for businesses across the country. So I do believe there are real grounds now for them to be very hopeful and very confident about the months ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we've all seen the data, and people, normal people, really understand and do understand the need for this lockdown. But like so many people across this House, so many members opposite and on these benches, I worry about our economy, jobs, businesses, mental health, children's educational attainment. So perhaps the Prime Minister could tell us how normal people in Milton Keynes and beyond, will know that things are getting better. Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I thank my honourable friend, and he's absolutely right about people's feelings across the whole country. They want a sense of when they're going to get better, and I've tried to give that today. I really think with the pace of the vaccine rollout, if it can accelerate in the way that I think everybody would want, we will reach an important moment on the 15th of February. And as I've said many times in this House, I do believe things will be much better by the spring.
Let's head up to Warrington North with Charlotte Nittles. Charlotte Nittles.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Special schools weren't mentioned in the Prime Minister's speech, but they'll be remaining open over the course of lockdown. Can the Prime Minister please therefore advise the House what advice and support they have received to stay open safely for the often vulnerable young people who need them, and whether SEN school staff, students and their parents will be given priority access to the vaccine to keep them safe?
Prime Minister.
I thank SEN schools, their staff, parents, pupils for everything that they're doing, and all the work that's being done, by the way, by teachers across the country to continue to look after the children of key workers, vulnerable kids as well. And the point she makes about vaccination, which is one that I think many colleagues across the House have made, bringing forward the case for this or that group. I think it's vital that we as politicians leave that to the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation, who are driven by a desire to stamp out the disease as fast as possible and to reduce mortality.
Let's head to Surrey with Jeremy Hunt. Jeremy Hunt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I fully support these measures and recognise just how difficult the decisions are. Before Christmas, we were told that testing was happening at the PHE facility at Porton Down that would tell us within a couple of weeks whether the vaccines worked against the new strain. I wonder whether the Prime Minister could update us on the latest on that. And if there is a glitch with the vaccine programme, are we implementing a plan B involving, for example, mass testing of high transmission areas, deprived communities, and so on, so that we can properly isolate as quickly as possible anyone who could transmit the virus?
Mr. Speaker, there is no reason to think that any new strain of the virus is vaccine resistant. And on his point about testing, I can say that mass lateral flow testing in communities across this country will continue to be rolled out because we still believe in its usefulness.
Let's head to Brentford with Ruth Cadbury. Ruth Cadbury.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As my right honourable friend, the Leader of the Opposition, said, whether it's on exams, financial support, border measures or test and trace, this government seems to sit and wait for the situation to reach boiling point before it acts. However, throughout the pandemic, most other governments have acted early and with clearly communicated contingency plans. So will the Prime Minister acknowledge that the problem here is his wait-and-see leadership strategy, and that he urgently needs to revise this so that the government can get a grip?
I thought I understood the honourable lady to be attacking the government's wait-and-see position on the vaccines, Mr. Speaker. But I really don't. Well, I really don't think that anybody in their right mind could accuse the government of moving too slowly in that respect. And indeed, I think she might add it to her script that this country has vaccinated more than any other country in Europe put together.
The great Brady.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the Prime Minister's assurance that this House will be consulted on the lifting of restrictions, should it be possible, before the end of March. But can I say to him that many of us are concerned at being asked to approve a lockdown which could continue until the 31st of March. Can I ask my right honourable friend to reconsider and to offer the House a vote at the end of January and at the end of February as well, not on whether to lift restrictions, but on whether to continue them or not?
Mr. Speaker, I thank my right honourable friend, and just repeat what I've said several times now, that I can't believe it will be until the end of March that the House has to wait before having a new vote and a new discussion of the measures we have to take.
To Scotland with Carol Monaghan. Carol Monaghan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We've had Christmas on, Christmas off, schools in, schools out, eat out to help out, stay at home. It's simply impossible to decipher the Prime Minister's COVID strategy. So given that the efficacy of the vaccines is not yet known against emerging strains, can he assure us that his strategy is not based on vaccines alone? In order to get our schools back, can he assure us that teachers will be a priority for vaccines? And could he detail his long-term COVID exit strategy?
I think possibly, Mr. Speaker, the best thing I can say in answer to that question is to repeat that we have, and I think it's very, very important to repeat this, we have no evidence that any strain of the virus is vaccine resistant, and I think it's very important that the honourable lady should be express full confidence in the vaccine programme, because that is going to be indispensable to our way out of this crisis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Educating our children and giving them the best possible start in life is one of society's most important jobs, which is why I know the Prime Minister has not taken the decision to close our schools lightly. Yesterday, I spoke to the Director of Children's Services at Durham County Council about ensuring that Bishop Auckland's pupils will still be able to access learning. So on that, can the Prime Minister confirm that the government will do everything within its power to ensure that every child across the country has access to high quality remote education during these closures?
Prime Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for her campaigning for education in Bishop Auckland, and repeat what we've said, what I've said already today about everything that we're doing to roll out to help support remote learning of all kinds. I know it's a tough time for children, teachers and parents, but a huge amount has been done to supply remote devices and to encourage remote learning of all kinds.
Thank
you, Mr. Speaker. Given the example of elections being held in other countries, including the elections held overnight in Georgia, can the Prime Minister confirm that it's his intention that the local elections in 2021 go ahead as scheduled on the 6th of May and not be delayed any further?
Prime Minister.
Of course, Mr. Speaker, that's what the law provides for, though obviously we'll have to keep it under review.
Mr. Speaker, can I congratulate my right honourable friend on getting a world-leading vaccine strategy going? Clearly, its success will depend on both the availability of the vaccine and the number of staff to administer it. As a qualified but non-practicing doctor, I've volunteered to help with the scheme and would urge others to do the same. But can I ask the Prime Minister why I've been required to complete courses on conflict resolution, equality, diversity and human rights, moving and handling loads, and preventing radicalisation in order to give a simple COVID jab? Can I urge him to get the NHS and the Department of Health to drop the bureaucracy, drop the political correctness, and do all they can to actually get the vaccine programme moving?
Prime Minister.
Well, I thank my right honourable friend. I can tell him I was fit to be tied when I read, because I read an account of what he's described several days ago, and I'm assured by my right honourable friend, the Health Secretary, that all such obstacles, all such pointless pettifoggery has been removed, and there should be absolutely nothing to stop him volunteering to be a vaccinator.
Let's head up to Bladen with Liz Twiss. Liz Twiss.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The decision to close schools this week was inevitable, but we do know that it will have a detrimental effect on many children, especially the most disadvantaged. School staff across Blaydon, like those at Crookhill School in my constituency, are responding brilliantly to the challenge, but it's just not the same for children as being in school. Will the Prime Minister commit now to working with teachers, trade unions and others to plan how we can level up the educational and life chances of our disadvantaged pupils post-COVID?
Prime Minister.
Yes, indeed I will, Mr. Speaker, because we must tackle the impact of differential learning that the last 12 months have had, and we will be looking in particular at the advantages of one-to-one tuition, which I think can be transformational, not just for kids who are falling behind, but for all kids.
We now head to Wales with Stephen Crabb. Stephen Crabb.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Without question, one of the most important things this government did in the first lockdown was to strengthen universal credit. And that's been a lifeline, not just for people who've lost their jobs, but also for people who've kept going out to work during this pandemic. People on low wages in retail, delivery jobs, people doing cleaning jobs. Now, our plan is still to cut that support back by £20 per week in less than 3 months' time. I know the Prime Minister understands this issue, but does he agree with me that now is really not the moment to weaken our welfare safety net, and that by giving families on low incomes greater security for the year ahead by extending rather than cutting support is the right thing to do?
Prime Minister.
I fully understand the point that my right honourable friend makes, and all I'll say is that we'll of course keep this under review.
Tracy Brennan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister will have heard across the House the concern for 3 million British taxpayers who've been excluded from support since March last year. They've had a terrible Christmas and New Year, and they're looking at another 3 months with no support at all. So it's no surprise then that their thoughts about the Chancellor's 90-second financial statement on Twitter felt like a kick in the teeth for those people with nothing. So does the Prime Minister believe that the excluded are important enough to get their own statement? And if so, when will the Chancellor be coming to this House to deliver it so that those taxpayers do not feel they are completely abandoned by this Prime Minister?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, with great respect, I don't think she could accuse my honourable friend, right honourable friend, the Chancellor, of not keeping the House informed. I'm sure he'll be using the earliest opportunity he can to update her and the rest of the House about the massive package of economic support that we're offering both the self-employed and others across this country.
Steve Beckham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome my right honourable friend's statement that these new regulations will be reviewed every 2 weeks. But can my right honourable friend reassure me that come mid-February, there will be a presumption rather than a prospect of an easing of restrictions? I understand there cannot be a cast iron guarantee. We're in a moving situation, but my constituents would like there to be a presumption, especially when it comes to schools.
Prime Minister.
Yes, I think I share her constituents' instincts. Perhaps a cautious presumption is what I would advise them to make.
Let's head up to Liverpool with Ian Byrne. Ian Byrne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ofcom estimates that 1.8 million children in our country are digitally excluded with a lack of access to equipment or broadband. And I place a bet with the Prime Minister that this does not include a single pupil from his former school of Eton. Digital poverty is a class issue. The Labour policy of universal free broadband that he derided in 2019 is now desperately needed. Can the Prime Minister outline how he will solve the issue of digital poverty, which is widening the already vast educational inequalities in this country, so not one child is left behind during this lockdown?
Prime Minister.
He'd of course know what the government is doing to roll out to gigabit broadband across the whole of the country, to give every part of the country access to superfast broadband. But in terms of the needs of people who don't have access to broadband yet, of course he'll have heard what we said about the mobile phone, the internet providers who are coming together today to provide cut price access for those who need it across the country. I think that's the right thing to do.
Dr. Ben Spencer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Once we've vaccinated the high-risk groups, so the vast majority of people who are at risk of death from COVID are protected, what will be the metrics in decisions made around moving areas down the tiers and reopening schools?
Prime Minister.
Grateful, Mr. Speaker. The metrics would be exactly the same as they were under the previous tiering system, so that we look at the rate of reproduction of the disease, we look at pressure on the NHS, and the other factors that he would expect.
Let's head to Birmingham with Steve McCabe. Steve McCabe.
The weather's even worse now than it was last March, Mr. Speaker. Will there be a repeat of the Everyone In initiative for rough sleepers, with the Prime Minister guaranteeing a repeat of emergency funding at least the same level as committed last March?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I think one of the consolations of the previous lockdown was that we did succeed in helping so many people off the streets, I think about 29,000, and we will continue to do everything in our power, and I think that the Honourable Gentleman raises a very, very important issue. We'll do everything in our power to prevent people from finding themselves sleeping rough or homeless during this winter, and that remains the policy of the government.
Lucy Appel.
The vaccine is a massive achievement of which we're right to be proud, and the Prime Minister should be congratulated for all his efforts in that achievement. We must cut away all barriers to speeding up the rollout, bin bureaucracy, incentivise 24/7 working by PHE, and pay bonuses, use drive-throughs, pharmacies, mobilise troops and volunteers. Will my right honourable friend make this rollout a dynamic, can-do, logistical, British miracle, saving lives and livelihoods, and not waste a single day taking us out of this lockdown hell?
Minister.
Well, I think that my honourable friend perfectly captures the mood of the country about the vaccine rollout. That is what we all want to see. We want to see a great national effort now, and she's right to call attention not just to the role of the NHS and GP clinics and GP services and hospitals, but also the vital role that can be played by pharmacies, the role of the armed services. We want to bring them all together to roll out this vaccine as fast as possible. And the picture she paints is entirely correct.
Let's go to Scotland with Martin Day. Martin Day.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Surely those who cannot work because of government restrictions should be compensated and supported. So given that the Chancellor has said that coronavirus restrictions could continue for months to come, will the Prime Minister commit to continuing furlough for as long as is needed and extending sector-specific furlough payments to the hardest hit sectors? And will he ever do anything for the 3 million who have been completely excluded from any support?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, they have not been excluded, and we continue to support people across the country. Furlough will indeed be continued for further, as he knows, and he should just bear in mind what I said to his right honourable colleague. It is thanks to the might of the UK Treasury, the fundamental strength of the UK economy, that we're able to make this support available across the whole of the UK.
Let's head to Essex with Stephen Metcalfe. Stephen Metcalfe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank my right honourable friend for his statement and commend him for his actions? It's obvious our clearest way out of these restrictions is to deploy the vaccine at speed and scale to protect those most of risk of serious illness. We need to therefore lay out plans, not only for the first 4 groups in the JCVI list, but also how we intend to get the vaccine to other key groups that keep our country running day to day, such as teachers, police officers, and home carers.
Prime Minister.
Well, my honourable friend, thank him. Well, we will have studied the JCVI's list of priority groups, and we will be setting out indeed, my honourable friend, the Health Secretary, will be setting out a programme for rolling that vaccine out, or those vaccines out, beyond the first 4 that I've already described.
Let's head up to Manchester with Jeff Smith. Jeff Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
My constituent Ross has had no work since the first lockdown and is one of the people who've fallen through the gaps in the self-employed support scheme. His only income now is £598 per month universal credit. His rent, council tax and bills are £590 a month, so he's living on £8 a month. Could the Prime Minister live on £8 a month? And if not, will he ask the Chancellor to look again at how we can help the people excluded by the self-employed support scheme?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I know that this has been raised many times already today by members across the House, but I must repeat what I've said. The 13.7 billion has gone to support the self-employed already. Further measures, I've no doubt, will be forthcoming, but the overall package of support is £260 billion across the whole of the country.
Heading down into Cheshire to Esther McVeigh. Esther McVeigh.
The Prime Minister will know that blue-collar conservatism was instrumental in persuading the supermarkets to return the business rate relief that they did not need. We asked them to do this on the basis that there are many who have gone without support during this pandemic, and it was on that basis that they returned that money. So will my right honourable friend ensure that that £2 billion returned by the supermarkets will go to those who have not had any of the support so far, who have been excluded, because they cannot go another 3 months without any income?
Prime Minister.
Absolutely, Mr. Speaker, and I thank her and her fellow blue-collar Conservatives for that initiative. I think it was entirely right, and I think that those corporations, those supermarkets, were entirely right to return that cash. But I can tell her that overall, when you look at the government's support packages, they go overwhelmingly towards the poorest and neediest in society. They are fundamentally a very, very progressive package of measures.
Remaining in Cheshire with Derek Twigg. Derek Twigg.
Mr. Speaker, cancer treatment is again being delayed. Even a 4-week delay is associated with increased mortality. Many cases were delayed longer than 4 weeks in the first lockdown. Today, Mr. Speaker, the Health Service Journal reports that the NHS is having difficulty in agreeing payments with private providers for surgery and treatment. Will the Prime Minister take action to stop any profiteering and ensure private providers use their capacity for NHS patients requiring urgent surgery, and urgently bring a detailed plan to this House on how the government intends to ensure that cancer patients get the treatment they need in good time?
Prime Minister.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I certainly can. One of the reasons for wanting to keep COVID under control in the way that we hope to do with this lockdown is, of course, to allow the NHS to continue with cancer treatment and other vital services. And he makes an excellent point about the need for all provision now to be dedicated to fighting COVID or providing essential services for the British public, and he can expect to hear more about the way in which we intend to cooperate with private providers.
Let's head to North Wales with Rob Roberts. Rob Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So far, Welsh Government has had an additional £5.3 billion in additional funding for COVID, but is still sitting on more than £1 billion in unallocated money, while my businesses in Delyn are in serious danger. Can my right honourable friend apply any pressure on the Welsh Government to provide more assistance to Delyn businesses, or could those funds be reclaimed by UK Government so that we can step in to help businesses where Welsh Labour is letting them down?
Prime Minister.
Well, I think my honourable friend raises a very, very good and important point, and he is right to take that up with Welsh Labour, to hold them to account, and to insist that the Welsh Government spends that money where it needs to be spent.
Let's head to Leeds with Hilary Benn. Hilary Benn.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Can the Prime Minister tell the House when every child in my Leeds constituency and across the country will have access to a laptop, and when every parent who needs help will be able to afford the necessary broadband or phone charges so that their children can connect up to their lessons, their teachers and their classmates? And who should they contact if they can't?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, he's raising the very important needs of his constituents in respect of broadband connectivity, of laptops, and I totally understand their concerns. I think obviously we're massively expanding those and rolling them out, but I think for the detailed answer that he needs about each of his constituents and of those in need, I will have to write to him, if I may, setting out exactly when they can expect the help that he's talking about.
Sir Edward Lee.
I thank the Prime Minister for listening to our representations on keeping places of worship open. And doesn't this show how, if we work together with a pragmatic approach, we can reopen the economy sensibly? And on this scene, many of us who will vote for the government tonight, out of loyalty or because we want to preserve the government's authority, are worried that with every successive lockdown, they are less and less effective. Because whilst every death is tragic, young people will have noticed reports that out of a population of tens of millions, only 400 have actually died who are healthy between 16 and 60. So will the Prime Minister tell people like me in these priority groups that there has to be an element of self-reliance, self-isolation, and actually looking after our own health, and we can't just rely on successive lockdowns? And particularly with the point of carers, I noticed that the Gainsborough testing centre was turning away people who were not showing symptoms. Surely we want to encourage all carers of all elderly people to go in and be tested. So let's get rid of all these bureaucratic hurdles and get more reliance on self-reliance.
Yes. Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right. We need to encourage people to go ahead and be tested, and I think he should encourage all the people of Gainsborough to do that where they have symptoms. And as he will know, there are initiatives available for community testing with lateral flow testing that I think should be encouraged by colleagues across the House. I know are being encouraged by colleagues across the House. I totally support that, but I also think that the British public and this House overwhelmingly supports measures to protect the NHS and save lives. And he makes a valid point about the way that coronavirus impacts on the population. It does fall disproportionately on the elderly and the vulnerable, but those lives must be saved where we possibly can. And I think that is what people of all generations in this country want to do.
Mr. Speaker, can I thank the Prime Minister and government for all their help that they've given so far over the last 9 to 10 months. However, can I highlight the aviation and the aerospace sectors, which have almost entirely shut down since the beginning of the pandemic? And as of the 4th of January, UK flight volumes were 73% below the pre-crisis levels. There are now legal restrictions on travel, and some countries have banned any arrivals from the UK. This is having a catastrophic effect and impact upon aviation and aerospace and the millions of jobs that rely on them. Yet these industries have received no sector-specific support, unlike others such as hospitality. In light of the unique impacts being felt by these sectors, could I ask the Prime Minister to provide sector-specific support to aviation and aerospace to see them through this very deep crisis?
Well, the Honourable Gentleman has raised this with me before, and he's an ardent campaigner for aerospace, and he's quite right. It's a vital industry for our country. As he knows, we have time to pay in other packages of support, but we will be ensuring that we do everything we can to get the aerospace industry in the UK back on its feet as fast as possible.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Every vaccination jab in the arm should be viewed as a pupil who can return to the classroom. And it's absolutely vital that we view it with that equation. Can I say to the Prime Minister, I've not always followed him through the division lobbies on these restrictions, but I will do so today, because it's absolutely clear to me that the vaccination changes the game and rids us of this pandemic. But can I ask him to ensure that the vaccination is available to the rural areas, such as the one that I represent in rural Rother, where we don't have the GP network or indeed the hub in place as of yet?
Well, I'm really grateful to my honourable friend for his support and for what he has just said. And we want to roll out the vaccine across the whole of the country as fast as possible. I think it is, I hope, common ground in this House today that we are right as a country to be putting those jabs in the arms of those who are most at risk of mortality first, because that is the way to reduce the death toll, and that indeed is the way that we hope to get our country back on its feet as fast as possible.
To Twickenham with Munira Wilson. Munira Wilson.
Much, Mr. Speaker. We're now in a race against time to save lives, save jobs and restore our freedoms, which is why we need a 24/7 vaccination programme, bringing vaccination to every high street in the country. So I welcome the Prime Minister's comments about the role of community pharmacy. Will he confirm that it's not just a few big chains that will be involved, but the thousands of independent community pharmacies, such as Goods Chemist in Twickenham, who stand ready, waiting and able to vaccinate, but have been knocked back? They will provide vital capacity and be able to reach people that other mass vaccination hubs cannot reach.
Well, I must say that the Honourable Lady is absolutely right to draw attention to the potentially vital role of community pharmacies. There are about 12,000 in this country, as I'm sure she knows. In my experience, they're great places. They're hygienic. The staff are knowledgeable. They're professional, and I think they can. We've already signed up hundreds to the campaign, and there'll be many more. I can assure her to follow.
Speaker, I think it is exceptionally welcome that the UK has consistently tested more people than any other country in the world. And I think that this House owes a debt of gratitude and thanks to Kate Bingham and her team for procuring the vaccine at such large amounts and such diversified quantities, something that the EU vaccination scheme never managed to achieve. So can the Prime Minister just reassure me and the members of the South West that we will see the vaccine rolled out and that the lockdown will not be extended beyond any necessary point than it needs to?
Yes, indeed, Mr. Speaker, and I thank him for his words about the vaccine task force, which, as I say, was satirised by the right honourable gentleman opposite, which I think was a mistake. And we will do everything we can to roll out that vaccine to his constituency and all constituencies across this country.
Thank you very much. Mr. Speaker, on Sunday, the Prime Minister came on national television and, looking into the eyes of the British people, announced and told worried parents that it was perfectly safe for them to send their dearly loved children to school. The following day, after being buffeted around by scientists, the opposition leader and devolved governments, he announced that it was not safe for children to go to school and promptly closed them all down. So does the Prime Minister agree that these constant last-minute U-turns and this erratic approach to policy making is not conducive to assuaging anxious people who are desperately seeking stability, certainty and assured leadership?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I really must ask the Honourable Gentleman opposite to withdraw what he's just said, because I did not at any stage say that schools were not safe. That is absolutely not what I said. And he, in all fairness, he should correct that. And I give him the opportunity to do so if he chooses to.
The Prime Minister closed down schools, so therefore they are not safe for people to return.
I think it's now on the record. The Prime Minister's actually put what he did say on the record. Right, let us move on to Craig Whittaker in Calder Valley. Calder Valley, Craig Whittaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've been contacted by several dentists and dental assistants who've been told locally that they do not qualify as health workers for early priority under the vaccination rollout. I am aware that my honourable friend, the member for Mole Valley, a dentist himself, has campaigned tirelessly for dental teams to be in category 2 with other healthcare workers. I wonder if my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, can advise for clarity whether dental teams are in fact in priority 2 with other healthcare workers for the vaccination rollout.
Well, like my honourable friend, I'm a big fan of our colleague, the member for Mole Valley, the great dentist, and I can tell him that all dentists in patient-facing roles and members of their dental teams who may have social contact with patients are eligible to be offered the COVID vaccine, and we encourage them all to take it if they're offered it.
Let's head to Dame Margaret Hodge. Dame Margaret.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My local hospital, Queen's, is one of many hospitals that is facing critical pressures with the supply of oxygen to patients. Demand for oxygen is running at 100% or more of the supply available. Will the Prime Minister assure me and my constituents that action is being taken to ensure safe and secure supply of oxygen? And can he tell me what contingency plans he has in place so that hospitals aren't overwhelmed and closed, critically ill patients aren't moved, and every patient receives the right amount of oxygen when they need it?
I'm very grateful to the Right Honourable Lady, and I will immediately look into the matter she raises about oxygen at Queen's Hospital. It hadn't been drawn to my attention before, but we'll be making sure that we get back to her as soon as we can.
Let's head to Hampshire with Damien Hines. Damien Hines.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And of course, the invisible shield goes first around the most vulnerable, and it's the JCVI that determines that sequence. But once the highest risk groups have been vaccinated, can I encourage my right honourable friend with the JCVI in looking again at prioritising key workers, including teachers, because of the special role that teachers play in our society and because we prioritise education?
I fully understand the point that my right honourable friend makes, and I'm sure that it will be borne in mind by the JCVI as they continue to make their judgments.
Let's head up to Lancashire with Cat Smith. Cat Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Chancellor announced a financial support package via a 90-second video on Twitter yesterday, but with him not coming to the House, it does make it very difficult for us to ask questions, so perhaps the Prime Minister can help. Yesterday's announcement on grants didn't say how long this new one-off grant support is intended to last, so perhaps the Prime Minister can tell us what will happen on business support should the current lockdown have to be extended or the vaccine rollout delayed.
Mr. Speaker, I think the Chancellor was very clear about the £4.6 billion with its consequentials that he announced to the House, and I really must say I don't think that anybody could fault the Chancellor for his willingness to come to the House and explain what we're going to do.
Let's head up to Rutland with Alicia Kearns. Alicia Kearns.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the Prime Minister join me in thanking the extraordinary efforts of the armed forces, especially those in Rutland and Melton, to defeat this virus? But at this time of national crisis, some of our enemies are seeking to exploit opportunities to undermine us. So can the Prime Minister reassure me that our vaccination programme will extend to our armed forces personnel and reserves most at risk from catching COVID in the course of their duties, especially those deployed abroad on mission-critical operations, so that their safety and ours is protected?
Minister.
Well, I thank our armed forces from the bottom of my heart, and I share very much what she's just said. They played an outstanding role throughout this pandemic, moving patients to hospital where that was necessary from remote places, conducting testing, and now playing a big role in vaccines as well. And I'm sure that they're, like every other part of the public sector, they will be considered by the JCVI as they come to make their decisions about the allocation of the vaccine.
Let's head to Hackney with Diane Abbott. Diane Abbott.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister will be aware that as school lessons move online, for poor families in areas like Hackney, the cost of pay-as-you-go broadband is completely prohibitive. He's talking about coming to cut price arrangements, but what so many families need is access to free broadband, an excellent policy which was in Labour's 2019 manifesto. No child should be deprived of an education because their parents can't afford the broadband cost. So will he look again at the question of providing free broadband when it comes to accessing online education?
Minister.
Yes, indeed, Mr. Speaker. But I think the arrangements that are being put in place by the mobile phone companies and others will cover the vast bulk of the cost at the very least. But I'm happy to come back to about exactly what is being offered.
Let's head to Somerset with Ian Littlegranger. Ian Littlegranger.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the Bridgewater and West Somerset constituency, we do accept the lockdown was vital, and we do appreciate, Prime Minister, the extra help for businesses. But will my right honourable friend urge you to consider the way government help for local authorities is being paid? Somerset County Council has been given huge grants and then diverted much of the money to balance their books, which I don't think is what they've seen this was ever for. These cowboys want to become a new unitary authority. It is a con trick using that cash that was meant to fight COVID. Prime Minister is Somerset born and bred, and I please urge him to put a stop to this so that the money is going to the people that need it most, which is the people of Somerset.
Well, he's quite right. My honourable friend is absolutely right to highlight what's going on in Somerset, where the county obviously has a duty to use COVID grants for that purpose and not for any other. And I thank him for drawing attention to what's going on.
Let's head up to Scotland with Alan Smith. Alan Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Happy New Year. To govern's to choose, and there's been a lot of tough decisions made by the UK government, and we've supported a number of the business support mechanisms that have been announced. According to the House of Commons Library this afternoon, the UK government has chosen to spend £3.3 billion of borrowed money on the stamp duty freeze, which is a vast subsidy to the middle classes who are buying and selling domestic property who don't need subsidy. Does the Prime Minister regret prioritising that and excluding so many people, small companies, freelancers in the productive economy who do really need support?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, that's entirely upside down and misrepresents what the package of support has done. If you look at the £260 billion, it is overwhelmingly progressive, and it goes disproportionately to support the poorest and neediest in society. And that's what I think this House and this country would expect.
Let's head to the Deepings with Sir John Hayes. Sir John Hayes and wife.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Millions of Britons live in remote rural places, including many here in Lincolnshire. The Prime Minister will know that isolation fuels fear, which exacerbates disadvantage. So he will know too that only vaccination will bring the safety that assuages those fears. Will the Prime Minister reassure my constituents that local doctors' surgeries will be equipped and supplied, enabled to vaccinate the vulnerable, not later, but sooner?
Yes, it's our intention, and Mr. Speaker, that doctors' surgeries, which clearly play a crucial part in the vaccination programme, will be equipped as fast as possible with supplies of the vaccine, as plentiful, I hope, as the copies of wisdom that I see adorn my honourable friend's shelf. That's what we intend to do. And I may say how delightful it was to see his wife Susan briefly in the background.
Let's head to Yorkshire with Imran Hussain. Imran Hussain.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When the Chancellor announced his support schemes for businesses and workers last year, I repeatedly warned him that their coverage did not go far enough and that many people in Bradford would be unfairly excluded, putting jobs, businesses and the livelihoods of the self-employed at risk. Will the Prime Minister therefore listen to my calls and the calls of campaign groups like Excluded UK to ensure that the same mistakes are not made and guarantee that everybody in Bradford who needs financial support during these difficult times will get it?
Yes, of course, Mr. Speaker. We will listen to the calls of Excluded UK as we listen to all such calls. And I repeat the message that I've been making today, that the support packages are there to help businesses protect jobs and livelihoods across the country, but they benefit disproportionately the poorest and the neediest.
Sir Christopher Cho.
Mr. Speaker, can I ask my right honourable friend what the public health justification is for criminalising gatherings held exclusively between those who have already been vaccinated for more than 3 weeks, where there is no risk of infection or transmission? Will my right honourable friend use his libertarian instincts and immediately introduce an exemption for such gatherings so that the many people in my constituency in the octogenarian group will be able to celebrate Brexit sooner rather than later?
I don't think any power on earth is going to prevent my right honourable friend from celebrating Brexit, but his iron logic is, of course, applied to the restrictions which we've been forced to bring in. And all I can say, Mr. Speaker, as I think most members across this House understand, is that the whys and wherefores of each restriction are not necessarily susceptible to iron logic, but cumulatively they are there to protect the public. And I believe the public understands that.
Senator South Wales with Alex Davies-Jones. Mr. Davies-Jones.
Diolch, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister will be aware that the Welsh Labour Government has committed to providing the most generous financial package available to businesses across the UK. Sadly, in Pontypridd, even the very best support available hasn't been able to prevent mass redundancies and business closures. My constituents could have been helped if this Tory government had stepped up to the plate sooner and committed to the union when Wales went into an earlier lockdown. Could the Prime Minister therefore explain why Wales continues to be an afterthought and what steps he will be taking to prevent people in Pontypridd from being excluded from any future support?
Well, Mr. Speaker, Wales is actually at the forefront of our thoughts and continues to be where we're anxious to continue to support the people of Wales in any way that we can. I think the salient point that I take from today is that £1 billion that the Welsh Labour government has failed to spend in the way that they could, and I would urge them to get on and do that. But the UK government will continue to support Wales as we support the people of the whole United Kingdom.
Let's head to Norfolk with Jerome Mayhew. Jerome Mayhew.
Mr. Speaker, in Norfolk, those most at risk from COVID have already received 27,000 vaccination first injections since the 9th of December. They're now available in our hospitals and 11 primary care networks, including the excellent Fakenham medical practice in my constituency of Broadland. From Monday, these sites will be joined by many others. We're ready to do whatever it takes to keep up with vaccine supply. So what are the chances of securing more than 2 million doses of vaccine per week?
Mr. Speaker, I thank him for what he's doing to campaign for vaccines in Broadland and indeed to scale up at speed across the country. I've said what I've said about the pace of the rollout that I want to see. That's already, as I think the Health Secretary would confirm, extremely challenging for our GPs, for our hospitals. It's a big target. It's a big ask of the country. And as he will know, because he may have heard me say this several times already today, this government has been going faster than any other country in Europe, and we intend to remain out in front.
59 is withdrawn, so we're going to David Jones in Wales. David Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In March last year, the government and the devolved administrations very laudably adopted a united response to the pandemic with a clear, jointly agreed message that was easy to communicate. But since then, they have pursued different approaches with different terminology and different messaging, which can, and I believe does, lead to confusion. So could my right honourable friend please work with the leaders of the devolved administrations by following the example of the 4 chief medical officers who have worked closely together and returning to the consistency and clarity of messaging that prevailed last March?
Well, I think that my right honourable friend makes a very important point about the occasional dissonances between the UK government and some of the devolved authorities, though actually, if you look beneath the political surface, you look beneath some of the argy-bargy that goes on, the fundamental message is the same. And I think it was very telling that the 3 devolved administrations and the UK government came together to enact the same, fundamentally the same package of measures at the same time yesterday and today.
To Cambridge with Daniel Zeichner. Daniel Zeichner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've listened closely to the Prime Minister, but at no point have I heard him apologise to education leaders, teachers, students and parents for the chaos earlier this week. He rightly asks the public to change our behaviours, which is in all our interests, but there is a reciprocal obligation on him too. So what does he learn from all this, and what will he do differently in future?
Mr. Speaker, I certainly wish to pay tribute to everybody involved in the education sector, the teachers, parents, pupils, everybody who's made a heroic effort to cope with this pandemic. And I think perhaps what he and I would agree on, that it was important to do everything we could as a country and a government to keep kids in schools if we possibly could. And indeed, I believe that was the policy of the Labour opposition, at least on Monday morning. And indeed, I understand why the opposition wanted to keep schools open. We all wanted to keep schools open. Alas, the pandemic has not made that possible, and we've got to take the steps that we've taken. I hope that he will also support them.
Let's enter a mission with Dame Cheryl Gillen. Dame Cheryl.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. PHE data shows that younger adults with learning disabilities and autism are up to 6 times more likely to die of COVID. Please, can they be added to the priority vaccination list immediately? And during previous lockdowns, vital exemptions included being able to exercise more frequently for autistic people. These were incredibly important in helping them cope and continue to have that much needed routine in their lives. Will the Prime Minister confirm that these will apply for the new lockdown so that autistic people are not left stranded? And will he commit to accessible information about this being published as soon as possible?
Yes, indeed, I will, Mr. Speaker, to commit to better and fuller information if that is necessary. Though, of course, as she knows, a general principle of these restrictions that people have more freedoms when they need to exercise for health needs.
Let's head to Devon with Ben Bradshaw. Ben Bradshaw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If, as reports suggest, the government intends requiring people arriving in the UK to have a negative PCR tests within 72 hours of their arrival, how will British people currently abroad in areas where it's difficult to get quick turnaround PCR tests get home? And I should declare an interest.
I think that the people of this country would want to see, as I do, proper protection, as I believe the benches opposite want to do, see proper protection against the readmission of the virus. And I'm sure the honourable gentleman understands that too.
Let's head up to Burton with Kate Griffiths. Kate Griffiths.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I recently had the chance to volunteer at our local vaccination centre, hosted by Burton Albion Community Trust. And I'm grateful to the work of Dr. David Atherton, chair of our local primary care network, and all his colleagues involved in the rollout of the vaccine to residents across Burton and Uttoxeter. Can I ask the Prime Minister to consider the consent process when looking at ways of speeding up rollout? At the moment, I'm advised that individual consent by a healthcare clinician takes 10 to 15 minutes. This means 41,000 hours to consent and vaccinate the priority groups in East Staffordshire alone. Will the Prime Minister consider a national consent model to help speed up this process?
My honourable friend makes a very interesting suggestion, and but I should stress that we have no plans to make vaccines compulsory in this country. However, we want to make it as smooth and as easy as possible, which I think is her objective, and I think she would join me in wanting to encourage everybody who is offered a vaccine to take it up as soon as possible.
Scotland with Pete Wishart. Pete Wishart.
And thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I wonder if the Prime Minister's had a cursory glance at Scotland and seen the massive approval ratings for our First Minister in her handling of the COVID crisis. And has he observed the clear leadership she has offered our nation? Does he ever sort of think about comparing his poor performance with her and wish that he could offer the same type of leadership to the UK?
Mr. Speaker, I must confess I haven't given that particular matter any thought, because I've been occupied entirely with protecting the NHS, fighting coronavirus and saving lives. And I might respectfully say that is what should be his priority as well, rather than these, if I may say, slightly abstract political considerations.
Remaining in Scotland with Douglas Ross. Douglas Ross.
Throughout this pandemic, the UK government have provided the Scottish government with billions of additional support, but we know hundreds of millions of that remains unspent. These are vital funds that could help to protect jobs and support businesses. So is there anything further that can be done to encourage the Scottish government to get these monies out to Scottish businesses as quickly as possible?
I think the best thing I can do is encourage my honourable friend in the excellent work that he is doing in holding the Scottish Nationalist Government to account, and encourage them to get on and use the funds that the UK government is giving the people of Scotland to support jobs in Scotland.
Heading up to Yorkshire with Alex Sobel. Alex Sobel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure the Prime Minister will agree that councils have borne the brunt of COVID, and particularly during lockdown have given all our communities maximum support. Leeds has incurred £40 million of additional costs as a council, not covered by the grants the government have given, and will now face further lockdown costs and have an overall £100 million budget shortfall, in main part caused by years of central government underfunding. Will the Prime Minister speak to his good friend the Chancellor to grant local councils a one-off payment to offset the additional costs incurred by COVID-19 to ensure the financial stability of councils this year and next?
Prime Minister.
Of course, Mr. Speaker, I know that many councils find themselves under great pressure, though some have handled their budgets better than others. We've given 4.6 billion, I believe, to support local councils. We'll continue to support them. And I thank, by the way, the staff and the workforce of councils for the huge and vital role that they all help to play in fighting this disease.
Teresa.
I received a worrying call this morning from the chair of the Barnet Council Health Overview and Scrutiny Committee, indicating that it may be that only 13 care homes in the borough have received vaccinations. Will the Prime Minister intervene to make sure the frail elderly and their carers in Barnet get the vaccinations they need as soon as possible?
Prime Minister.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I will. I think since I've said that I want to have maximum transparency, I think I can. I do want to see an accelerated rollout of vaccination in care homes. So far, I believe that 10% of care home residents and 14% of care home staff have received the vaccine, but that clearly needs to be stepped up.
Let's head to the Rhondda with Chris Bryant. Chris Bryant.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's been great to see vaccination already starting in the Rhondda, but obviously we can only give it when it arrives. And the Prime Minister quite rightly said earlier that we should be prioritising for the vaccine those who are at risk of mortality. Well, Rhondda Cynon has the highest, unfortunately, the highest rate of death per 100,000 of any local authority in the country. We have a very large percentage of people who are extremely vulnerable, and we have a higher than average percentage of people who are working in the NHS. So can I urge the Prime Minister, as a matter of urgency, to prioritise communities like the Rhondda and make sure Rhondda surgeries are not just getting 70 or 80 doses of vaccine a week, but hundreds, so that we can vaccinate everybody at risk?
Well, he makes an eloquent point about the way in which many people in the Rhondda will naturally fall into the high qualifying groups to be identified, or that already have been identified by the JCVI.
We now head up to Yorkshire with Jason McCartney. Jason McCartney.
Mr. Speaker, I welcome the Chancellor's £4.6 billion in new lockdown grants, but can the Prime Minister please look again at more support for hospitality, pubs, breweries, the entertainment industry, tourism, weddings, the self-employed and those excluded so far, and specifically maybe look at delaying the tax return deadline to help freelancers and the self-employed, and also look at extending business rates holiday and the VAT reduction, and finally look at setting up a hospitality and tourism recovery fund.
I thank my honourable friend, and I know that our right honourable friend, the Chancellor, is going to consider all measures necessary to allow the hospitality sector to bounce back just as fast as we can get them out of the restrictions that business currently faces and get them bouncing back. And that will depend, as the House has heard extensively today, on our ability to roll out this vaccine. But above all, it depends on our ability to follow the rules, the restrictions, the guidance of these measures. And I hope very much that honourable members will support them this afternoon.
In order to allow the safe exit of honourable members participating in this business and the safe arrival of those participating in the next, I'm suspending the House for 3 minutes. Order.